His most pertinent areas of interest and expertise for today's session are philosophy of economics and economic methodology. In 2021, Uskali published a paper titled Homo economicus under pressure, an appropriate and prescient title for this symposium. And today he's going to talk with us about Homo economicus and epistemic dynamics of its multiple lives.
Thank you. It's a delight and honor. Thanks, David. The title is a bit cryptic. I wonder if you have any idea of what I'm going to talk about. But anyway, so I'm a philosopher of science, and some of these labels might apply to me. Maybe all of them. But they are not quite like Homo economicus is, because Homo economicus is a bundle of idealizing assumptions. And I don't think any of these have been developed or articulated in terms of idealizing assumptions. So they might easily apply to me. I might be an exemplification, maybe, of all of them. I'm not an exemplification of Homo economicus, neither is any of you. So this is my subject matter, this domain of phenomena related to recent research on human behavior in economic psychology and some other fields. With very rapid changes, confusions, ambiguities, disagreements, misunderstandings, etc., etc. This is a philosopher's delight. This is what keeps us employed. And our task then is to clarify, elucidate, remind of missed opportunities and gaps in arguments and so forth, questioning, creating some trouble at times, zooming in, zooming out. Those are the things that are not the daily activity of all practicing scientists. So I will be focusing on this very title of the symposium, Homo economicus evolving. So when I started thinking of what to say here, it was obvious that I every now and then came back to this title and couldn't quite make full sense of it, what exactly it might mean, etc. And I will come back to this. I will look at it from different perspectives and using different concepts or conceptual frameworks, etc. It will be a series of attacks, both in favor and against this very idea of Homo economicus evolving. So here is an all too simple account that actually we can read in many accounts of behavioral economics. Homo economicus is dead, it's extinct, whatever it's gone, let's say goodbye to it. And it's dead due to accumulated negative empirical evidence. So many experiments have already shown there is nothing like that in social life. So let's move on to other and better models. And this is actually what natural scientists would do. So why don't we do as well? And then impatiently asking, why doesn't this happen? Why haven't it already happened? Why isn't everybody already in agreement that a better alternative must be in place, etc. This is all too simple. Things are. This is not how things go. There is an explanation that I found most amusing as an explanation of this last answer to this last question. Why doesn't it already happen? And it's in terms of economists being badly educated in philosophy of science. They don't understand what science is all about. That's why they don't move on and leave Homo economicus behind, because of all of these empirical pressures. No, this is philosophy of science today tells a very different story. It's much more complicated than this alone. Actually, if I were to propose some rough analogies, I would say the neoclassical version of Homo economicus in its simplistic form is very much like philosophy of science some decades ago, also very simplistic. And it seems that this preferred explanation for the lack of change regarding Homo economicus is very much like that Homo economicus itself in its simplicity. Whereas today's philosophy of science is much more like behavioral economics in its nuance, richness, complexity, and so forth. So the key idea here is that when asking what determines the fate of a model, like Homo economicus, or what shapes the evolution of Homo economicus, it's not empirical evidence alone that determines it, like concluding that this is how people really behave, or that's not how people really behave. There's so much more there. It's empirical evidence for sure, but so many other things like theoretical and technical environment within the field of inquiry, various kinds of methodological conventions like tractability, parsimony, unification, microfoundations, and these are extremely important in economics especially. And actually these conventions differ, they vary from discipline to discipline. They are not common, all shared by all disciplines at all. Then different kinds of functions and purposes and uses and questions like explanatory questions that are being asked or uses to which these models are being put, etc. They vary, and you need to be aware of those and their role in determining whether a certain model is being held or not. Considerations of scope, various ideas of what the applicability conditions are of any given model. It's very little attention has been paid to this in these debates, in my judgment. And various kinds of academic institutions and other social aspects of inquiry, like network externalities. I mean, if you're a loner with some great new fancy idea, you will stay alone for a long time, and maybe you lose your job and whatever until anybody else gets interested. You need network externalities to get an idea going and accept it, developing a larger agreement around it and so forth. So you see that in this list alone we have many kind of conservative elements like tractability, unification, and network externalities that serve as frictions in the development of an idea or attempts to refute an idea such as Homo economicus. Just compare. So the first generation behavioral economics, Herbert Simon, and the next. Why was it so much easier for Kahneman and Tversky to get through, accept it, than it was for Simon? For those reasons that I have listed there. Here is the menu. Actually, I could have easily talked about sort of rewrote the complementary paper Homo economicus under multiple pressures that was actually cited just in the introduction. But I started getting too excited about all other things, and as you see, there's too much here. But I will very briefly deal with all of them, except for the second and last, second Homo economicus to Homo sapiens, and then the as if that I've dealt quite a bit of work on myself. So here we go. So the first theme, dead, alive, evolving, how many of there are, and how to call them, or how to call it. The history of it could not be briefer than here. So the phrases were coined in Economic Man and Homo economicus in the 1870s as part of the criticism of English political economy at that time. And then thinking of all those versions that we find in the history of economics. I mean, it's not just one Homo economicus, it's several models of it. And they vary along different dimensions, such as thick and thin versions. Maybe it was thick in the beginning, then it got thinner, and maybe it's becoming thicker again. Then this is a very important dimension, internal mental on the one hand, external behavioral on the other hand. Again, I mean, because this matters for whether a given criticism finds its target at all. If your evidence is about these internal mental matters and you're trying to criticize a version that is put in terms of external behavioral ideas, then your criticism will miss the target. Economics with doors open for interdisciplinary inputs, then the doors were closed, and now maybe they are open again, at least ajar. Maybe not fully yet. More realistic and utterly unrealistic, maybe more realistic again. And then the field of inquiry, like decision theory, price theory, theory of social coordination. This is often forgotten. We are not only talking about model of man or model of human behavior. This model is always plays a role as part of a larger set of other models and so forth, and that also has consequences for how we should judge any given model of Homo economicus. Pure theory, applications, etc. Pure theory typically no self-seeking behavior. In applications, you operationalize the objective function in terms of selfish motives and things like that. All right. Is it extinct or evolving? This is what I will be coming back over and over again. How many are there worth the name? Depends on what we take Homo economicus as a phrase to denote. And here are some of the alternatives. This list might not exhaust all there are, but at any rate, here is a definite version described in terms of a fixed list of assumptions. Okay? Now, that, by the way, might die or might go extinct, but a family of closely related such versions might have more survival value, if you wish. And here is an idea that occurred to me. Any conception of human behavior that is used for investigating economic phenomena, any conception found in any economic theory or in any discipline studying the economy. So Homo economicus is just a name for any idea of human agency that plays a role in the study of the economy, whether in economics, micro, macro, whatever, you have decision theory, or in economic sociology, economic anthropology, political economy done by political scientists, whatever. You always have something that could be called Homo economicus because it's a human being within the economic context. This is not how it's used, but anyway, it's a very logical and sense-making possibility. And in this sense, it will never die. Its survival value is infinite. And then any conception of human behavior that is found in the most up-to-date economic theory. Okay. Now, you may find, except for C, you probably find all of these in the literature. And they have major differences between them regarding the implications. A and B are closer to common usages of the phrase Homo economicus. B, C, and D are comfortable with the idea that it evolves, or at least it can evolve. B and C allow for multiple versions, while A and D allow just one, or one at a time. So these are major implications also for our linguistic practices, how to call whatever conception of human behavior. Now this is a kind of finger, how you call it, a finger exercise or whatever. This is a title that some of you recognize, of a major paper published in Journal of Economic Perspectives by some guy called Richard Thaler. And there is an evolutionary idea here. He is predicting that Homo economicus will evolve into Homo sapiens. Okay, now this sounds quite interesting and also fit for the symposium. And here is the richer characterization of economic agents that he expects to be the evolved Homo sapiens. Okay. I'm going to dispute it, and then I will kind of give him some chances of defending. Now look at Homo sapiens in its ordinary disciplinary context, like biology, anthropology, archaeology, and these are among the characteristics you find in terms of which Homo sapiens is being defined. They are all mostly anatomical. Okay? Is this what should be of interest to economics? Anatomical features of Homo sapiens? So would it be a good idea for Homo economicus to evolve into Homo sapiens after all? This is my question here. I mean, this almost sounds nasty, but there is an excuse. Okay, so let's save Thaler from embarrassment. Homo, well, you know what that means. Sapiens, wise, discerning, etc. Knowing. Wow, no anatomy here. So there is a focus on cognitive capacities after all in the name. Interesting. So this seems to say Homo economicus will evolve into Homo sapiens from the charge of focusing just on anatomy. But as such, it is also compatible with high capacity Homo economicus, the one that Thaler wanted to leave behind, the one that he predicted to evolve into Homo sapiens. So this does not give him full excuse, but there is another one, and this is the recent study of survival of the friend list. Most of you probably know of this. So comparing Homo neanderthalensis with Homo sapiens regarding their social propensities, sapiens is more empathetic, more caring, more collaborative, friendlier, and what have you, and that's why we have survived. Neanderthalensis was too nasty, too hostile towards others, and so forth. And we might even say that Homo economicus is more accurate as a model of Neanderthalensis than of sapiens. That would be an interesting subject for further inquiry. This is just a conjecture. But this might excuse Homo economicus will evolve into Homo sapiens. But we are not quite there yet to forgive Thaler for that statement. Namely, concepts typically are contrastive. The semantics of Homo sapiens is contrastive. Its definition seeks to distinguish one species from other animal species among primates, especially from our relatives within the genus Homo. So we have those other Homos, and sapiens is just one among them, and its characteristics that we list are ways of distinguishing Homo sapiens from others in this genus. Whereas the natural contrastives of Homo economicus are among human social agents that is within the species Homo sapiens. Okay, and then we have these others, Homo sociologicus, politicus, and what have you. They are all versions of Homo sapiens. So the idea of Homo economicus evolving into Homo sapiens seems to be a mistake after all. Okay. And I'll skip that, it's all too interesting. And here is something rather dramatic perhaps, because this is what we know nowadays, that one and the same model of Homo economicus can be applied to human beings, artificial intelligence, and bacteria, as in models in biological markets. Regardless of the cognitive capacities these subjects have. What they all share in common is that the main stress in explanation is on the environment, situation, context, rather than the interior of those agents, resource scarcity and those kinds of things. So there is no necessary focus on selected cognitive properties of Homo sapiens here, no room for anything mental, for example, desires, beliefs, and so forth. Does this mean we need to drop sapiens as well? So Homo economicus would, we wouldn't have Homo, we would just have economicus, and economicus would not be a version of sapiens anymore. These are some of the interesting issues that can be developed by these sorts of speculations. So is Homo economicus extinct after all? It doesn't evolve. Cannot evolve. It's gone. Okay. Here is a very, very important issue that's often forgotten when debating Homo economicus or commenting on it. What explains what? Explanation is a matter of, here is by the way, again, another passage from Thaler. It seems logical that basing descriptive economic models on more realistic conceptions of economic agents is bound to increase the explanatory power of the models. It may appear logical, but it's not. This is not the case, at least not without major qualifications. It all depends. It all depends what your explanatory questions are, what you seek to explain. This key question, what explains what? You need to keep that in mind whenever you judge any explanatory effort. What is it to explain? This I will not go into this. This would be a subject for a full lecture. But here, what explains what? What exactly are the explanantia, the explaining factors, and what exactly are the explananda, the things to be explained? So exponans, explanandum are the singular. These are the plurals of those. These two need to be aligned, and this alignment is often missing in these critical commentaries of Homo economicus and whatever else. This is very, very, very simplistic, but anyway, just as a starter of those complications that we have, just thinking of the explananda, things to be explained. What is kind of, where do they belong? What kind of sort of ontological or metaphysical map of the possible explananda we might have? And this is just dividing them into tokens and types, and then individual organization and some aggregate level matter. And now, much of the time when reading literature and behavioral economics, it's a matter of explaining individual token behavior, like Mrs. Jones's choice here and now, there and then. Okay, sometimes type behavior, etc. Now, much of economics is not interested in that at all. Actually, it used to be the official or semi-official doctrine within economics that economics is not in the business of explaining individual behavior. It's in the business of explaining aggregate level phenomena. And very importantly in this case, in the case of Homo economicus, the downward sloping market demand curve. likewise the upward sloping supply curve. You need to be able to derive those in order to have market equilibrium. So, and for that you need at least constrained by further methodological conventions of tractability and unification. Homo economicus will do the trick, the service for you when explaining these aggregate level matters. Okay, skip that. And then very briefly, I mean, if individual behavior indeed is the explanandum, then what we need for explaining it on the exponent side might be just these cognitive mechanisms and the situation. Just to simplify a bit, of course. And if the explanandum consists of aggregate behavior and macro level patterns, then we need to invoke social mechanism, situation, and very stylized individuals, maybe with no detail on cognitive mechanisms, etc., for the explanation. And here is the important division of the uses of Homo economicus field-wise, as it were. Decision theory is one thing, and price theory is quite something else, or theory of markets or welfare theory. I mean, it's, decision theory asks different questions from price theory or theory of the markets, etc. Different explanatory questions, and therefore the explanations probably will be also different. And therefore I'm just suggesting here that if Homo economicus is evolving, this does not mean, and should not mean, is likely not to mean the same thing in these two different realms of inquiry, decision theory and price theory. The dynamics is likely to be very, very different. And we also might suggest that greater realisticness of right sorts about the workings of individual minds is required for decision theory than for price theory. Okay. Applicability conditions. Okay, where are we supposed to find Homo economicus, if anywhere? Or where is it sort of the closest? Here is, of course, the classical idea. The market sphere is the natural habitat of Homo economicus. So, and if thinking of two of these primitive concepts of the market, exchange and competition, it's a very old idea in economics that within a transaction in the market, what's required of Homo economicus is nothing but you don't play to the pockets of the other side. You play to your own pocket. That's what's needed. And there is nothing about human nature or those kinds of things stated here. Competition, participants in a competition might prefer surviving or winning rather than becoming losers or dropping out. Okay, that's kind of sounds sense-making. So that's how people tend to behave, or this is the idea at least, in the market. And that might be provided as a justification of using at least some version, some old-fashioned version of Homo economicus. And here is a somewhat dramatic idea. If this mega trend that's called the marketization of society is real and underway, if society is being marketized increasingly, the market is an expansive social institution, ever more things in society are becoming part of the market, this would mean that people are increasingly homo economized, or whatever the phrase would have to be. So this would be another meaning for Homo economicus evolving. We, as real people, would become ever more Homo economicus-like because we are living in markets that keep expanding across society. There are other ideas of the applicability conditions of Homo economicus regarding type of agent, business behavior rather than consumer behavior. Okay, competitive pressures take care of business behavior. They are far weaker in the case of consumer behavior. Type of decision, simple and recurrent decisions rather than complex long-term decisions. And then there are those who say that, for instance, expected utility applies universally. And then we may, again, coming back to the title of the symposium, we may say that learning about these applicability conditions is a matter of Homo economicus evolving. So we become ever wiser about where it would apply, and that's kind of evolution. I'll skip this. We find a very, very elaborate idea of the applicability conditions of the theory of perfectly competitive in Fritz Machlup. I have no idea how I'm doing with the time. Lots of time. Oh, okay. No rush. Okay. Idealizations. As I said in the beginning that Homo economicus is a bundle of idealizing assumptions. And of those assumptions, we know they are not true. This is in the nature of being an idealization. Now, evolution of Homo economicus might be a matter of relaxing some of those idealizing assumptions, maybe one at a time, or maybe several at a time, and then checking what happens. So it would be a matter of de-isolation or decreasing abstraction. That's a phrase that used to be popular some time ago. An analogy here would be to think of Milton Friedman's example of Galileo's law of freely falling bodies. That law isolates gravity. There are all sorts of idealizing assumptions surrounding this isolation, such as assuming a vacuum, assuming there are no other forces, the Earth is flat, and those kinds of idealizing assumptions. And then when explaining actual events in the wild, like, you know, me dropping this thing here, it would require a lot of relaxations of those idealizing assumptions, so as to add further forces that make an impact on the falling body. But in the enriched explanation of this falling body in the wild, as it were, gravity remains. It's still there, but you just add further forces next to it. It's like vector addition or something like that. It's not so easy to see whether it's always that kind of thing going on when Homo economicus is being enriched by de-idealization, thereby adding further characteristics, enriched motivation, imperfect cognition, etc. But I think this is much of the time what you might be thinking when saying Homo economicus is evolving. Maybe David had this originally in mind. This is Homo economicus is evolving in this particular sense. Here we have some questions that I don't have answers to right now. Does Homo economicus or part of it, such as the capacity of constraint optimization, remain part of the exponents? Like in the case of gravity, remains part of the enriched array of forces that make an impact on a falling body in the wild. And then this naming or calling question, I mean, what to call the whole enriched exponents, whether or not it is part of Homo economicus, whether or not part of Homo economicus is part of it. It's, I mean, when it evolves, then whether language kind of keeps up. It's that's one of the interesting issues. Here is another way in which idealizations play a role in explanation, and this is the Max Weber style of using these idealizations as ideal types. This is the authentic Max Weber notion of explanatory ideal type. An ideal type is a benchmark, so there are no normative connotations here. So if the neoclassical Homo economicus is used as an ideal type in the Weberian sense, there is no normativity attributed to it because of just this explanatory use of the ideal type. And then we observe and identify deviations from this benchmark, like from the neoclassical Homo economicus, and those deviations are construed as the exponanda, the phenomena to be explained. And so instead of rejecting the ideal type due to massive negative evidence, it is kept alive and given a constructive role. So evidence seems to speak against it, but we don't give it up. We use it constructively so as to define or put together the explanandum to be explained. So there is a sense in which Homo economicus is evolving here too. It's being assigned a new epistemic task as a Weberian ideal type. So Homo economicus sets the benchmark, neoclassical standards of rationality, whatever. But it cannot explain those deviations. Hence, other exponentia are needed, and that's where behavioral economics comes in and provides those other explanatory resources to explain those deviations from neoclassical Homo economicus. Further questions here: is part of Homo economicus also a part of the exponents? So does neoclassical Homo economicus only play the role of Weberian ideal type, or does it also ideal type in determining the exponandum, or does it also play a role in the exponents? There are options here depending on which way you go. What is it for Homo economicus to evolve? Okay, again, it might be a matter of learning to use the old version for setting the explanandum while construing a new version as the exponents. That sounds like evolution. But then how to call these two versions? I mean, we need names. It's not, if Homo economicus evolves then, and we still use the old one, we need a name for the old one, and we also need a name for the new one. Okay, and so it's something very different to think of Homo economicus as a normative ideal type. I think there's some confusion in the use of language here by many behavioral economists, especially by when using this notion of normativity. It's explanatory ideal type is one, normative ideal type is another, and using it normatively as it is being used normatively then implies various kinds of policy implications, nudgings and those kinds of things. When I'm give me some idea. I forgot. Sorry?
15 minutes.
Excellent, because, okay. So this is one of those dimensions along which these opinions vary. Behavioral economics was marketed, very strongly marketed in terms of now we are going to have more realistic economic theory, more realistic image of human behavior and all that, also more better predictive powers and these kinds of things. I mean, even this is a very strong statement, Rabin, a couple of decades ago. Ceteris paribus, the more realistic our assumptions about economic actors, the better our economics. Hence, economists should aspire to make our assumptions about humans as psychologically realistic as possible. Now, he forgot about the ceteris paribus in the second sentence. Ceteris paribus contains so much. It really contains so much that as a general rule, this does not hold. For many, many purposes, it's okay to use even vastly unrealistic assumptions, and no scientific realist would protest, at least should not protest. Okay. Here, just very, very briefly, my own. This is my lifelong work in one slide. And the funny thing is that English language is very flawed regarding these matters because you use the term realism ambiguously. You use it both as a property of theories, like when using the phrase realism of assumptions, etc. I've proposed instead talking about realisticness and unrealisticness. They are properties of theories, assumptions, models, etc. And then realism as a theory of theories, or theory of science, or whatever. Scientific realism is a kind of mainstream idea of what science is all about. It's about finding out facts about the world and so forth. And this should be called by that name, realism. Should not be conflated with properties of theories. And then the question is, then we can raise the question, does realism as a theory of theories require maximizing the degree of realisticness as a property of theories? The obvious answer is not. No. It all depends. It all depends. It all depends on the structure of theories, what functions different components in those theories and models play, etc., and then of course the structure of the world and the purposes for which we use those models and theories, including their numerous components playing different roles. It's so much more complex. So any such simplified claim is just bound to be wrong. There are ambiguities, of course, a great deal of ambiguities regarding realistic and unrealistic, or realisticness and unrealisticness. How much is included or excluded in a model, for example? How many arguments in the utility functions? Things like that. So this is a matter of the whole truth, as it were. Comprehensiveness. And it's something very different from how truthful we are about what is being included in our model, regardless of how much we include in the model. And this is a matter of nothing but the truth. And it's a nothing but the truth that, of course, is more important for a realist, or for realism. And then how well supported by evidence. And there's much more, many more versions of realisticness and unrealisticness. Now, I'm going to talk about Berg and Gigerenzer's critique of behavioral economics. They also talk about realism. They think that behavioral economics has actually betrayed realism. They have resold it, just like Pareto and company sold it long ago. But now this is my final theme, the many functions of as if. Okay. Now you all thought that as if is just one thing, but it's many, and you will learn something in the next few minutes. It all derives from Hans Feichinger's the Philosophy des Allsops, 1911. The philosophy of as if. It was translated in an abridged form in English in the 1920s. Friedman and Savage adopted the idea in their statement of the expected utility theory, and here you have the phrasing. So individuals behave as if they calculated and compared expected utility, as if they knew the order, etc., etc. Whatever the psychological mechanism, doesn't matter. Okay, And Friedman, in his famous 1953 essay on the methodology of positive economics, says the same thing about business behavior. Individual firms behave as if they were seeking rationale to maximize their expected returns, had the full knowledge, etc., etc. Okay, now the Berg and Gigerenzer argument is that behavioral economics is just like that, and if possible, even worse. It's also as if economics. So it's neoclassical economics in disguise. Well, I'll elaborate the argument for you, and then I'll give my comments. So Homo economicus is made thicker, as it were, by adding new stuff to the utility function and those kinds of things. So it becomes more realistic, more comprehensive in behavioral economic theory. This is agreeable, of course. But because they keep constraint optimization as the decision-making mechanism, it now becomes even more difficult to optimize due to the increased complexity of the utility function. So therefore, this act of optimizing, or the claim that they optimize, is more unrealistic about that mechanism than it was with the neoclassical Homo economicus. And therefore, it must be put in terms of as if the process, this constraint optimization, occurs, even though we know it does not. It cannot. It's all too difficult. And therefore, we should switch to some other more realistic mechanism. So this is the basic criticism they put forth. There are two issues here, as I see it. They proceed largely as if all accounts of behavior have the same or similar uses and purposes. They don't distinguish between different explanatory questions, different uses of these models, etc., different fields of inquiry where the agenda might be very different, and so forth. It's all psychology, as it were, or something like that, or their version of psychology. So there's a relative silence about the uses, purposes, explanatory questions of various accounts of behavior. And I've already suggested to you that this really makes a difference. You need to be aware of the various uses and explanatory problems you want to solve. And secondly, they proceed as if there is just one interpretation and use, and only one use of as if. But in fact, as if has multiple uses and does not imply any particular philosophical position, such as, which is very popular to say, if you use as if, you're an instrumentalist, you're a fictionalist, at least you're an anti-realist, but I don't buy any of that. So here is my division. This is just 3 different versions of as if, and you see that they are very different also regarding, they're different regarding the explanatory purposes they might serve, they're different regarding the philosophical outlook that they might commit you to. So the first one, the isolation of a menu of causes being as if the isolated menu of causes were the only ones contributing to what happens, even though we know it's not. So all other causes are supposed to be absent or negligible, etc. They are removed or excluded by idealization. And then the example, of course, would be as if people were motivated by self-interest only, like John Stuart Mill might say something like this, or as if other motives were absent or negligible, etc., even though we know they are not. Then behavioral economics would provide this de-isolation, enlarging the menu of causes, adding further motives, etc. But this is not among the targets of the Berg-Gigerenzer critique. I'll skip this, because we find very similar ideas in Friedman's essay. As if what is isolated, not the isolation itself, that you isolate many of causes, exclude all others, but then what is being isolated is expressed in terms of the as if people's decision process or decision mechanism were one of constraint optimization, even though we know it's not. And this is the target of the Berg-Gigerenzer critique. And their proposal for an alternative, of course, is the re-isolation of the process, replacing constraint optimization by fast and frugal heuristics, what have you. And this would be the really operational process, known to be so, know as if needed. We know this is it, and so forth. And this would be, I guess, a revolution, not an evolution of Homo economicus. It would be something very different from, sufficiently different for this change to qualify as a revolution. Okay. And then, finally, the final version or use of as if to express epistemic caution. Now, who knows what exactly the decision process or mechanism is? We don't quite know yet, but we entertain various possibilities as hypotheses, as if this, as if that. Okay? We don't know whether it is this or that, and therefore we keep investigating the issue. I think it's a very useful use of as if. We don't reject an idea all too early, but we entertain it and keep researching on it and so forth, because it seems that people behave as if this is the mechanism, but we don't quite know yet. So the use of as if here is an expression of uncertainty or tentativeness, and actually Berg and Gigerenzer could use it constructively for their own favorite idea of the decision process, but they don't. They misconceive it as an anti-realist tool. So my idea here, I actually surprised myself by coming to this conclusion, kind of pluralism, maybe a pluralist as if. Well, an old mechanism is still used, hedging it with a retrospective as if, as it were, and the as if is here handy for protecting old ideas against too hasty rejection. Maybe they still serve some purposes, some useful roles, etc. Maybe as Weberian ideal types or whatever. And then the new mechanism is hypothetically entertained with a prospective as if. As if here is handy for paving the way for bold new ideas. Again, not too hastily rejected. But all of this must be relative to purposes of use, explanatory questions, cognitive interest, and things of that kind. Now, and this is the final slide. Maybe pluralism overall regarding Homo economicus. Keep many old versions and develop many new versions of Homo economicus. How many? Well, as many as are needed for serving legitimate epistemic and practical purposes. Now, this then prompts another question: what exactly makes any proposed purpose legitimate? But that's another line of debate and research, perhaps. Might this be one possible future of evolving Homo economicus? Having many of them, plurality of them. The social loner, and this is a kind of supposed to be funny, the social loner, the asocial Homo economicus becomes a higher order family. But there are challenges here. What to call those family members? They cannot all be called by the name Homo economicus. This is a small trouble. Then the second challenge, there is a pressure on and from the methodological conventions of unification and tractability and social pressures such as network externalities, etc., I mean, if you have too many of them, very different kinds, you lose tractability, you lose unification, and what about network externalities? This is just among some of the dilemmas that you are going to face if you follow the pluralist line. I'll stop here. Thank you.